Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, Rasheed, and that's my friend and co-host today, Carl Zaz, back in the building. How's it going, Carl?
Hi, Rasheed. Long time no see. Good to see
Well, it's
you.
storming on my end, man. I mean, the bottom just fell out, so you'll be hearing thundering going on in the background. But, Carl, let's jump right into it. We see that the Israelis have been targeting civilians. I mean, this is like for everybody to see. They're allowing some food and some supplies to come in so that the people can go to them, and then they are actually killing children and women, and there's no outrage in Paris, Berlin, London, Brussels, or the United States. And yet they want us to have feelings for when they are hurt or when something that they don't like going. What is going on with the Western world?
Moral bankruptcy, Rasheed. I mean, this has been morally bankrupt for a long time, but we're finally seeing the tide shifting because just a couple of days ago, there's actually a genocide scholar wrote a opinion piece in New York Times. This is New York Times we're talking about, and he said I can no longer call it other than genocide. He said I study genocide. This is what's happening in Gaza is a deliberate attempt by Israeli to wipe out Palestinian from Gaza, and so even Piers Morgan, right? I mean, doing what British always do grandstanding after everything else had failed. Have had is now shifting his tune. So I think now we're at a point where I would say majority of the world's public opinion have turned against Israel. But the problem is, the Israelis, they have their influence is such their state capture in many Western institutions, Western states. I'm talking about including United States. Most obvious example is the fall off on the Epstein case,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, you have Trump who had made his part of his campaign promise to expose the Epstein file, and now doing 180 degrees and say there's no there's no perpetrators other than Epstein. He just trafficked all these thousands of girls for himself. I mean, nobody's buying that shit. And how long this atrocity will be allowed to continue? Um, I wouldn't say allowed. I mean, like, U.S. is pretty much complicit, right? Without U.S. support, Israel would not exist. And right now, Israel's economy is on the brinks of collapse. It has been on the brinks of collapse for a while now. It's been sustained by continued cash infusion from the United States. And this is what allowed them to continue their genocidal campaign in Gaza. Um, yes, it is what it is, unfortunately.
Could this be also um, anger and lashing out? Because look what's going on. We see them bombing Syria, the people that they helped to get into the power structure of Syria, because Israel played a major part with Turkey and the United States of allowing ISIS and all of these other terror elements to take Damascus. Damascus. Now we see Israel is encroaching upon more Syrian land, and we see them bombing the very people that they help to fight against the Syrian government. We see them bombing Lebanon, and we see them screaming about Israel. I mean, about Iran. Could this be a anger from the Israelis because they didn't accomplish their goal in Iran, and that they know that Iran uh, will support the resistance? So if I can't get you, I'm going to get the people next to you.
Well, this is what Warren Buffett would call focusing on your core competence. I mean, Israel is now focused on its core competence, which is hitting people that can't fight back, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they realized they made a mistake when they hit Iran because that's way bigger than the Israeli could chew, because Iran can rain missiles upon Tel Aviv and Haifa, and in regarding to Syria, the Giuliani regime had been bending over backwards for Israel. Just despite I still I'm old enough to remember like a Vice documentary back in 2015 when it looks like those Al Qaeda elements were marching on Damascus. They were saying, "Oh, first we're going to seize Damascus, then Jerusalem." Right? They've done nothing. I mean, they have control of Damascus. They have done nothing to said or done anything against Israeli aggression. But for Israel, that doesn't matter because Israel's goal has always been systematic dismantling of any kind of state capacity of all its Arab neighboring states, whether it's Lebanon, Iraq, or Syria. They can't allow any of its neighbors have any kind of state capacity to resist Israeli aggression. And right now, this both align with the interest of Israeli state, but also personal interest of Netanyahu, because Netanyahu, he if he wants to remain in power, if he wants to get out of jail, because if he's out of the power, he'll be prosecuted for corruption. So for him, it's imperative to continue the war on the war path, to spread the aggression, so he can remain the war president of Israel. And that's not to say this is a Netanyahu's war, because it's also Israeli strategic imperative to destroy the Arab country in its neighborhood. We know that from General Wesley Clark, the former spring commander of NATO, when he said after 9/11, his buddies in the Pentagon told him about this plan of destroying 7 countries in 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And those countries on the list are Syria, Iraq, Libya, Sudan, Somalia, Iran. Right? Iran is just too big. So now Israel is going back to its core competence, hitting people that can't hit back, and because of the regime change in Syria, the state capacity of Syria has been completely demolished. They don't have the means to resist now any Israeli aggression meaningfully. So for Israel, that's just part of the plan: systematic dismantling of the Arab states, all in its neighborhood, so Israeli expansion can go on unimpeded.
Mm-hmm. Um, Speaking of Israeli expansion, when we're looking at the map now, Carl, do you think this is also, like we say, systematic to push that notion of greater Israel?
I mean, Netanyahu doesn't even make it a secret anymore, right? He has publicly shown the map from the river to the river, from the river of Nile to the river of Euphrates. That has always been part of the Great Israel Project. That Israel is going to expand to cover most of the Levant, and this is being fully backed by United States, because this is and well, the sad part is that this is all also done with com- complicity of the Arab states in the neighborhood. Like I'm talking about Egypt, I'm talking about the Gulf Arab states. All of them are in on it. And in fact, during the 12-day Iran Israeli conflict, Jordan was scrambling its air defense and air force to intercept Iranian missiles hitting to Tel Aviv. So they all have shown their asses where they stand, and unfortunately, this is what allowed Israel to have a free hand in Middle East.
Mm. Well, continuing on that line for just a second, this is an article that came out on Press TV today, and it says Yemen's naval blockade forces closure of Israel's only Red Sea port, and it says Israel says its only Red Sea port in Eilat will shut down next week, deepening debt crisis triggered by a month-long naval blockade. So we see that in conjunction with Iran's hitting the strategic ports and stuff like that. How can Israel continue to survive? Listen, because we know that it's on the gratuity of the United States, the UK, and the EU. But how can it continue to survive when they are bankrupt also, and they're begging for people to buy their debt so that they can continue to go on another day?
Well, U.S. as much we like to see de-dollarization, unfortunately, U.S. is still the reserve currency of the world, and United States can print dollars. They have been, that's how they have been funding their own military adventures, including supporting the proxy war in Ukraine and supporting Israel. But what they're facing is a different issue. U.S. I said this many times. U.S. can print as much dollars you want. You cannot print missiles. You cannot print F-35s, right? And that's where they're running into a real bottleneck right now during these proxy war U.S. is waging. We saw the real resource constraint in the Ukraine battlefront. NATO has basically provided all its arsenal. Now it's depleted. It's depleting its own arsenal to a dangerously low level, and to supply the Ukrainian army. Yet the Ukrainian army is continually getting demolished in the battlefield, and they had to shuffle around their anti-drone air defense between Ukraine and Israel because they don't have enough of both. So there's some real supply constraint on the part of the U.S. empire right now, especially with China imposing the rare earth mineral export control. China just recently, I think, ban titanium export as well. So with all these critical minerals they can't get their hands on, this is going to slow down this military industrial complex supply chain considerably. Now, U.S. Israel, the U.S. had a plan for producing 12 THAAD interceptor missiles for the year of 2025, and they had planned for expanded production for the fiscal year 2026. But all that plan happened before China put on the export control on those critical minerals. So now, and the Israel actually fired off more than 1 year supply of that missile interceptors during the 12-day war, and they just can't. This is why Israel have to sue for ceasefire, because they can't keep up. They can't keep up the pace of depletion for their air defenses against Iranian missiles. And Iran has tens of thousands of missiles. It can keep them coming. And this is why Israel now is switching back to attack Lebanon, attacking Syria, attacking Gaza, because this is an area they know they will do so with impunity.
Now, as we switch a little bit to Epstein a little bit, before we go to that, I want to advise everybody that if you hear some noise in the background, it's the frogs outside. We have a bad storm, and I live out in the country, so I live in the county area, so you'll hear the frogs, a lot of them out there. So I just want you guys to understand that if you hear that croaking. Trump lashed out at people, calling them weaklings and all of this stuff because they're questioning him on Epstein. I want to play a clip for you. There'll be 3 clips back to back. Each one of them are very short. And then I want to get your take on what's going on, because it seems like he's trying to push this off, but it's not going away. And Carl, what's crazy about it is that Tucker Carlson is talking about this. You have Candace Owens is talking about this. You have other people, but you and I talked about these things long before and didn't get the publicity that everybody else. And they're pretty much mimicking some of the stuff you and I and Brian said about the situation that is now occurring. So I want to play these clips, starting with this first one right here.
President Trump is defending U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi over her refusal to release documents from the Jeffrey Epstein sex trafficking investigation. Critics say the move is part of a government cover-up. ABC's Andrew Dimbert has the latest.
This morning, the Trump administration pushing back against calls to fire Attorney General Pam Bondi over her handling of the Jeffrey Epstein files.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years.
A Justice Department report this week revealed the accused sex trafficker did not keep a secret so-called client list, seemingly contradicting Bondi's statement earlier this year that she had Epstein's list in her office.
It's sitting on my desk right now to review.
Bondi now clarifying that statement, saying she was taken out of context.
My response was, It's sitting on my desk to be reviewed, meaning the file along with the JFK, MLK files as well.
The Justice Department report also confirming Epstein died by suicide. Investigators saying the conclusion that Epstein died by suicide is further supported by video footage from where Epstein was housed. But some critics raising questions about that footage, pointing to a jump in the timestamp from 11:58:59 to midnight. Bondi, when asked about the missing minute, said the videotape glitch happens every night and is not a sign of tampering. Still, some Trump loyalists not happy with these explanations.
The only other explanation that I can think of, again, maybe you've got another, is that intel services are at the very center of this story.
Elon Musk also critical, posting, "How can people be expected to have faith in Trump if he won't release the Epstein files?" President Trump yesterday dismissing the speculation.
We have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep?
Elon Musk, during a previous feud with Trump, claimed the president was listed in the Epstein files, but Musk later deleted that post. Andrew Dimbert, ABC News, New York.
And so we'll follow that up with two shorter clips. But before, I want to read the headline of the article. It says, Trump lashes out at weaklings who believe Epstein BS amid building GOP pressure to release documents. And the first paragraph says, President Donald Trump is accusing some of his one-time supporters of being weaklings who are falling prey to Democratic BS about the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, concluding that he no longer wants their support. So that's what he's saying, and we'll go to the next one, okay?
I think it's just a red line that it crosses for many people. Jeffrey Epstein is literally the most well-known convicted pedophile in modern-day history, being convicted years ago for procuring a child for prostitution, as well as other charges. And this is something that's been talked about by many people serving in the administration, myself, and many others on the right and the left, of there needing to be transparency of the rich and powerful elites that were in his circle while he was just one of the worst serial abusers of young women. And I really think people deserve transparency on that. And it's not wrong to continue to push for it and ask for it.
Heard that. And we have one little short clip after that. But I want to, when she said something, it brought my mind back to the first clip. So I want to play the first few seconds of that first clip over again. Here we are.
President Trump is defending U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi over her refusal to release documents from the Jeffrey Epstein sex trafficking investigation. Critics say the move is part of a government cover-up. ABC's Andrew Dimbert has the latest.
This morning, the Trump administration pushing back against calls to fire Attorney General Pam Bondi over her handling of the Jeffrey Epstein files.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years.
A Justice Department report this week revealed the accused.
He's throwing shade at Jeffrey Epstein, and he's denouncing his supporters who want the truth. And he said this guy has been talked about for years, and he's like dismissing him. But let's look at this. Me that he was just some passerby. It looks like that they were very acquainted with each other because he is in Trump's Mar-a-Lago place of residence. What have you to say about this call and the whole situation? Because it seems like he's digging himself into a hole even more. And the old saying is, when you're in a hole, stop digging.
Well, that's Trump. I mean, it's unsurprising he would lash out in such a manner. But look, Trump is on his second term, so he's not worried about getting reelected, so he doesn't care anymore. This is why he doesn't really he's going so far to insult his own constituency that got him elected because he doesn't care. But the real reason he won't release Epstein file because all of them are on it, whether Democrats, Republican. Clinton was close with Epstein as well. You have everybody, Bill Gates. You have Stephen King's. Stephen King now he tweeted say, "Oh yeah, Epstein list is so real. So is Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus." I'm like, dude, you were hanging out with that guy. Of course you would say that. Same thing. All of these guys are people in the U.S. need to realize. All these elite, they're all in it together, right? Where they do this. They're never one of you. They may pose as they represent your interests, but they live in a whole different world. And this is I'm hopefully finally somebody is having their eyes open by this new revelation. I mean, it comes no surprise to most people, like this is how exactly Trump would act. But hopefully, more people will be radicalized by this. One good thing is now we see even the split in the former Trump supporters because we like to think the MAGA is just one giant personality cult built around Trump, but it's actually good now. These MAGA supporters are questioning Trump's administration handling Epstein case because it's so outrageous. I mean, it's so in your face. American people shouldn't accept this.
I was laughing at the comment by JC in the comment section, but again, this show, this excrement show in politics in the United States, how do you think it's playing to the global public and the people who are watching it from outside of the empire?
These are not serious people. I mean, the global public. I mean, I don't know how much the global public are aware of the Epstein case in U.S. because that has been pretty well publicized inside U.S. But it kind of exposes the level of corruption and hypocrisy that exists in the U.S. administration. I mean, I like to say, it degrades U.S. reputation abroad, but then I realized what U.S. reputation? I mean, like the U.S. reputation has been the dumpsters for ages. So I don't think this will come as a surprise for a lot of people outside the U.S. that the U.S. leader are morally bankrupt people. Yeah, of course.
Do you think that if the pressure continues to build, that this will force a major distraction like a strike on an unknown country or Iran? Because it seems like every time a president is in political turmoil, they trump up or drum up some kind of phantom threat so that they can get the public to rally behind them and get their eyes off of what is actually going on.
Well, that's what Bill Clinton did, right? After the Lewinsky scandal, he bombed Serbia. So that's possible. But I think that the difference is, Trump is so thick-skinned. He might doesn't even care. Like he doesn't care. Like this guy, he will do what's necessary to protect his own ass. Including not releasing the Epstein file. But as for reputational damage, I don't know, man. Like does this guy really care about his reputation? I don't think so.
Before we go into the Russia-Ukrainian thing, I wanted to make note because I see a lot of people talk about how the Czech Republic is standing up to van der Leyen and everybody else. But I want to bring something to your minds. Just the other day, they banned an African basketball team from the basketball championships in the Czech Republic. This did not make the rounds on any of the alternative media, but the Malian women's basketball team was banned by the Czech Republic, and they didn't come up with any real reason why they banned them from getting visas to attend the championship that they were more likely going to place first or close to it in. So I wanted to bring that up, and I brought that up because you're on here, Carl, because I hear a lot of the Western people talk about Chinese racism in Africa, and this gets swept up under the rug here. What just took place here, and it's major because the Czech Republic is one of the main countries that they're using as a bulwark in alternative media about going against the grain of Ursula von der Leyen and the rest of the Western imperial crew. So, but nobody made mention that this just took place. Why do you think that they would put emphasis on a event that takes place from a Chinese merchant and ignore what took place by a European government?
Well, of course, this is what they always do. It's always projection when they talk about China. It's to distract people from what they themselves are doing. And every confession, every accusation is a confession. Mm-hmm. And all these all these Eastern European countries, they're all like hardcore anti-immigration or whatever. It's like, dude, nobody's coming to your country. They're at best they're using you as a conduit to travel to Western Europe, right? I mean, it's like all these like Polish, anti-immigrant groups. Like, dude, nobody's going to Poland, man. They're just coming through, going to Germany. Just relax and chill. But yeah, this is it's ridiculous.
So now let's look at the Ukrainian front. What is going on in the Ukrainian front? We see that the United States and some players in NATO want to up the ante with long strike, deep strike weapons to the Nazi regime to try to put pressure on Russia. But if they were to do this, this would be an open declaration of war. And no matter how patient and how understanding Russian President Vladimir Putin may be, pressure would mount on him to strike NATO territories if this were to take place, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, right now Trump is basically continuing the failed Biden policy. Trump is now thinking about providing longer range missiles to Ukraine, and this is done by transferring those missiles in the NATO stockpile, in the stockpile of those European countries to Ukraine, and then for U.S. to provide them new missiles to those European countries. So this is, again, it's a grift. It's a grift for U.S. military industrial complex by depleting the NATO arsenal and then having to order replacement from the U.S. factories. I'm old enough to remember Trump said he was going to resolve this whole Ukrainian crisis within 24 hours of him getting elected. Well, it's been more than a half year already. That's not happening because Trump still think he can dictate terms of peace to Russia. He still act like U.S. is a unipolar hegemon, get to tell everyone what to do. But like other negotiation Trump is involved in, Trump does not have cards on this negotiation table. Russia holds all the cards. Russia is winning in the battlefield. They're systematically dismantling another Ukrainian army that's sent against them with the NATO equipment. So you're not going to gang on in a negotiation table. On negotiation table, what you cannot win with hard power. That is a lesson that Russia has learned. Putin actually gave the interview recently. He said this is a hard lesson that Russia learned, that they cannot rely. They cannot be naively thinking that the West can somehow turn into partners, because that's what Russia had tried to do in the late 90s and early 2000s when Putin first became the leader of Russia. He actually asked Clinton if Russia could join the NATO, And and Clinton has had to say, "Oh, let me check with my people," and then but later he comes to act like, "Sorry, my people said no," which opens another set of questions like, why would you, Clinton, supposedly the president of the United States, the most powerful man, leader of the free world, have to ask your people? Who are these people that you're asking, right? Of course he's talking about probably talking about his deep state handlers. But the 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 idea that somehow Trump will fight the deep state and reverse course is ridiculous. Trump relies on the deep state to run the country, to run the United States, to run the U.S. empire, and the deep state have a vested interest to stay in Ukraine and to remain hostile to Russia, because that's how all these jobs and careers in all these NATO and Atlanticist institutions get funded. Their entire existence depends on continued hostility toward Russia, and they would not allow U.S. to pivot away, resource or otherwise, away from that conflict to concentrate on China. Of course, this is what some people in U.S. would like to do, like Professor John Mearsheimer had advocated. Well, we should wash our hands in Ukraine and get out of Middle East so we can focus on containing China, the big enchilada. But that's not happening. There's too much institutional inertia that's already built in. And right now, if you look at the Trump's policies, it actually looks no materially different from the Biden policy. They're providing longer and longer range missiles to Ukraine for them to strike deeper and deeper into Russia, with potential to escalate the war even further. But all it has done is to firm up Russia's determination to finish the war on their terms. For Russia, they don't want a temporary freeze. They don't want another Minsk. They don't want another Minsk agreement. They have been fooled twice in a row. Minsk 1, Minsk 2 agreement. The West has used that opportunity, the pause in fighting, to build up the capability of Ukraine armed forces, only for a bigger conflict down the road. That's what Russia wants to avoid. Russia want to resolve this existential issue for their own national security, to neutralize Ukraine, to make sure Ukraine will never be part of NATO, and there will be no NATO troops on Ukrainian soil that posing as a dagger toward Russia's soft underbelly. So Russia's strategic goal is very clear. As long as Trump cannot satisfy those Russia's term, the war will continue until Russia get what it wants on the battlefield. That's just how it's gonna roll.
Lindsey Graham, the girly boy, was putting threats on people and on Twitter, and he was talking about ask the mullah in Iran. Isn't that an open admission that the United States was the main factor behind the attack by Israel on Iran? And what makes him think, is he so deluded that he believes that America can do the same to Russia, the largest nuclear power on planet Earth and the most powerful armed forces in Europe?
Well, there's no war Lindsey Graham doesn't like, right? There's no war Lindsey Graham doesn't back. And he's, I think he's making up for some kind of deficiency in some parts. But these people always think Russia as a glorified giant gas station with nukes, right? Which couldn't be further from the truth. I've been to Russia in 2023. If Russia was a gas station, it must be the most beautiful gas station I've ever visited. Its capital, Moscow, is much nicer and cleaner than any European or American cities I have been to. And the thing is, Lindsey Graham, his whole shtick is to perpetuate the perpetual war, and he just doesn't. The thing is, people like Lindsey Graham they themselves do not suffer the consequences of the war they're advocating, right? It's not Lindsey Graham's children that's going to the front. Lindsey Graham don't have any children. He is not going to go to the front. So he's basically sacrificing other people's children, other people's economy, for God knows whatever reasons. And that is a problem. That it's a problem. Is all these warmongers, they do not suffer real world consequences of their actions, and this is why they continue to advocate for war everywhere. But but you're right. Russia is even stronger than Iran, and Russia do have nuclear weapons, and right now there's nothing much that NATO can do to stop the Russian victory on the battlefield. They have already, if anything, the Ukrainian troops are getting demolished right now. They're probably more experienced in fighting than the NATO troops ever are. Because the NATO operations for the last several decades have been against Afghani and Iraqi sheep herders. They don't have real experience of a real war, and I don't think they and with all these NATO equipment, it made no difference. It made no difference in the battlefield, even if they provide longer range missiles that could hit deep inside Russia. That's not. That's just gonna make the bear even angrier. Just how about just don't poke the bear? But it's a very simple and logical solution for most of the people. But these people, the people that live in the Beltway bubble, they live in their own world. They imbibe on their own propaganda. They get high on their own supply. So it's they're completely delusional.
Before I talk about what Michael let me talk about what Michael says. But beforehand, I see you, Jay, and I see you, Region 9. You guys are hilarious in the chat. Anyway, Michael N says, a gas station with a growing economy. Absolutely. Russia cemented its place as the fourth largest economy with purchasing power parity. And it is continuing to grow. The ruble is the strongest currency in the world right now, and it is causing the central bank of Russia to have to rethink policies. Now, all of this after 19 rounds of sanctions by the EU, the United States saying that they were going to strategically defeat Russia. Common sense would tell them to do a reappraisal of their policies, but they are doubling down in madness and failure. What does that show you about the leadership in their visions for their own security and their own prosperity, Carl?
Well, I mean, what visions? Do the U.S. leader have any visions and any kind of short-term profit for their buddies? I mean, all their all their machinations with Israel by steering wars in West Asia against Iran, that just all that does is just gonna boost the oil price, which is great for Trump's buddies in the U.S. big oil industry, but it's also good for Russia. That means Russia will now sell oil at a higher price. But that's not something they care about. They probably care more that their buddies are making a killing in the stock market. You bet your bottom dollar, the Trump's buddies are probably making a killing with all his flip flops on the tariff issues, right? I mean, people have saw irregularities in the stock market before the so-called Liberation Day announcement when he imposed tariff against everybody. These guys are laughing to the bank, and that's all they care about. They, when they're talking about U.S. national interests, they're talking about the interests of their own pockets.
Mm-hmm.
They're not talking about interests of Joe Sixpack in Michigan. Come on.
Before we transition to the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is China, What do you think about what's going on in North Africa in the Sahel with the with more nations shaking off the back of colonialism, and then the United States, France, Britain, and the rest of them are trying to reintroduce colonialism by flooding those states with terrorism, trying to destabilize them?
Yeah, I mean, like it's so blatantly obvious now. You have Burkina Faso just kicking all the Western companies out, and next thing you know, suddenly all these jihadis militia get empowered, and then you have also this liberal interventionist account on Twitter openly cheering. So this is what you get for kicking Westerner out. Now one of your province got taken over by jihadists. Well, makes you wonder who's really behind those Al Qaeda's types. Like it's so obvious. U.S. France, they buy these guys. This whole terrorism threat in Sahel got blown up after NATO operation in Libya, because NATO flooded weapons to these Al Qaeda types to overthrow Gaddafi. And with the fall of Gaddafi, these terrorist groups get their hands on arsenals of Libyan military, and that's how they have been being able to push deeper and deeper into the Sahel region to destabilize a wide swath of regions, from Mali to Burkina Faso. This is so obvious to everyone, and this is the same playbook they use in Syria as well. But I think ultimately, people are wising up to their game, and I think what United States have tried to do ever since Obama years is try to do the imperialism on the cheap. This is what Obama mean when he said lead from behind. To wage proxy wars, let others be your cannon foders. But I question. This is actually a reflection of weakness of the U.S. empire itself, because you can no longer do stuff like Iraq and Afghanistan. So now it falls back into proxy wars against its perceived enemies. I don't think this will, but how is that working out? Look at how it's not working out in Ukraine. When this proxy comes up to a real state power that's got its state capacity all together, they won't be able to make too much headways. I sincerely hope that's true for Sahel region as well. I think in the long run, these proxies will be a nuisance, but not be be able to toppling regimes like the way they have done in Syria or Libya.
I've seen across the Sahel the newly united three African states of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, but especially in Burkina Faso, where they kicked out France, the IMF, and everybody else, and they came together and established their own bank so that they don't have to go out and get the funding from the IMF. And the bank is backed by the resources of all three nations, which are rich in resources. And now they're building airports, highways, hospitals, universities, schools, health clinics. All of this stuff is going on, and there's an economic surge there. Why do you think it's so hard for some Western people to realize that the reason this is now taking place is because the obstacle has been removed, and the obstacle was Western exceptionalism and imperialism?
Well, because they have been told by their mainstream media China is a problem. It's China that's a neo-imperialist power in Africa that's somehow miring the African nation with debt traps, but very silent on what they're actually doing, because that's the whole reason France is able to enjoy the quality of life in France right now is because France has been leeching off the resource of Africa for decades. This is this is why people are surprised. Oh, well, why is French getting kicked out of West Africa? Well, why is French in the West Africa? They're there to maintain peace and stability. Well, apparently they're not doing a very good job, are they? Yeah.
So also to talk to you about what's going on with the Asian nations, but it seems like as the West realizes that it's frail and that it is in a very precarious situation, they are lashing out, especially Trump threatening to sanction BRICS nations and anyone that joins on to the BRICS program or whatever. This is absolutely suicide because these are the largest funders of your state, and you're telling me that you're going to impose tariffs and taxes and you sanctions on the people that you depend on to buy your treasuries to keep your economy going? Isn't that insane?
Well, actually, China is no longer the largest foreign holder of U.S. treasuries. China has conceded that position to Japan several years ago when China started reducing its own holding of U.S. treasuries. So, China, at one point, China's holding of U.S. treasury was like $1.4 trillion, and now it's down to 700 billion. So China already half its holding of U.S. treasury. It's Japan now still holds like somewhere north of $1 trillion of U.S. treasury debt. And in the recent net tariff war, Trump waged against Japan after slapping the 25% foreign auto tariff, and then they're slapping another 25 general tariff against Japan. Japan has said, look, if you keep on doing this, we're going to be forced to sell U.S. treasuries. And that will be a nuclear moment for the U.S. financial market because, if Japan start dumping its more than $1 trillion worth of bond, that's going to wreak havoc in the bond market. And I think Japan was finally able to grow a spine because it witnessed what China did. When China stood up to Trump tariff and Trump turned into Taco Tuesday. So this is and this is why I don't think Trump is serious when he says he's gonna put secondary sanction on purchase of Russian oil. Well, who is the largest purchaser of Russian oil? China and India. You just had a tariff war with China where you realize 145% tariff is unsustainable, is a self-embargo, so you have to go rush to chase down Chinese trade delegation all the way to Europe to negotiate a deal. And now you're going to want to bring that back to 500% tariff? Are you kidding me? Like nobody believe he will do that. Like that's just stupid. And this is why nobody can take Trump seriously. He can change his mind in like 24 hours in a tweet. It's like why even care? So he's recently threatening to slap higher tariff on Brazil because Brazilian President Lula had said in the BRICS forum that we need to move to a new trade currency because if we don't do that, we're going to end the 21st century the same way we entered 20th century. And he's, of course, referring to the World War I and World War II. And Trump, Lula didn't even mention US dollar by name. And Trump suddenly says, oh, no, that's unacceptable. The BRICS is an anti-American alliance. They're trying to de-standardize the dollar. If they're gonna degenerate the dollar, I'm gonna put the hurt on them. I'm gonna put like 10% on the additional tariff on all BRICS members, and when Lula shut back, it's like, okay, it's unbecoming for leader of a great nation to issue threat over the internet. We are a sovereign country. We don't need an emperor. And then Trump, then threatened to slap 50% tariff on Brazil if Brazil don't release Bolsonaro. And this is gonna first of all, U.S. actually enjoy a slight trade surplus with Brazil, and the U.S.-Brazil trade absolutely dwarfed by China-Brazilian trade. So that's just going to mean Brazil, you're going to pivot even harder to the east. And Trump just recently slapped another 50% tariff on copper imports. Well, where's the U.S. importing its copper from? It's not importing copper from China. It's importing copper from Chile and Peru. All these Latin American countries that U.S. want to keep in its orbit in its Monroe Doctrine. Well, guess what? These countries now have no choice but turn to export more to China. So whatever Trump policy is doing right now, all his tariff policy is making China looking like the one responsible world leader. And this China is the one that's providing stability for the world economy right now, whereas Trump is wreaking havoc, because if it's only one, it's one thing that business absolutely hate is uncertainty. And Trump, by changing his mind every 3-4 days in a tweet, is creating a very uncertain environment for business. And this is why a lot of U.S. businesses right now, they're withholding investment, because they're still waiting to see what the fall will be. And that had led to freezing on hiring. This, again, bad for unemployment numbers in the United States. And this is all Trump's doing, man. All he's doing is accelerating the U.S. economy toward recession. But Trump doesn't care, because he's not facing re-election. So, this is why he's even giving the middle finger to his own base right now by doing 180 on Epstein case. And it's a complete disaster. But you know what? For me, that's great, because I believe John Mearsheimer when he says, John Mearsheimer is great. He's one of the greatest analysts when it comes to United States. John Mearsheimer's premises is that the intention doesn't matter. Capability is all that matters. He's arguing because of that, U.S. need to contain China. But flip of side of that is, you know what? You're right. Capability is all that matters. And right now, Trump is destroying capability of a U.S. empire on all levels. And I absolutely enjoy that. I'm just sitting here in Bali and enjoying my sun and enjoying the slow decline of United States. Well, not slow anymore. Trump is my president for accelerationism, and he's doing a great job. So yeah, so people say, Carl, you need to be more serious, not laughing. No, I love to laugh at the decline of U.S. empire. I do that every day.
Well, some consequences have already come back with Brazil. Meat packers and beef suppliers have already said that they will now redirect their supplies elsewhere, specifically targeting China and Asia and African markets. So he is really hurting it. Now, Flying Crocodile, go ahead, say something, Carl. Go ahead.
And that worked well with Trump's tariff war, because China now has stopped buying beef from United States. Now China has switched to its beef import to Brazil precisely because of the Trump's tariff war. So everything works out.
Flying Crocodile says this: they have $37 trillion of debt. If Japan only holds $1 trillion and China even less, the question must be asked, who owns the debt? Well, the Treasury. The Fed has bought up his own debt. That is tantamount to the crack dealer smoking his own crack and thinking everything is going to work out and he'll still be in the position that he's in at this moment. So everybody on the outside is looking at the crack dealer smoking his own crack. And they understand that he's no longer clean. He's no longer wearing the nice jewelry and the clothes. He's over in the corner with the other people that he used to sell to. And after that, he starts stealing, lying, and doing everything he can to get a fix. That's what we see exactly happening to the American empire. What say you, Carl?
I mean, you hit the nail on the head, Rasheed. I mean, that's exactly what happened. This is why Lula is advocating for a new trade currency in the first place. Especially after what they did to Russia, kicking Russia off SWIFT and seizing Russia's sovereign fund. Then everybody realized, okay, we could be next. Anytime if we displease the U.S. could seize our funds in dollars. So this really light up fire under everybody to de-dollarize. And recently, everyone is signing new deal with China to be using the CIPS, the Chinese cross-border settlement, as a possible alternative to SWIFT, because on one hand, China has no plans to replace the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency, because having your currency as a world reserve currency, that means you are actually exporting your currency, and that means you are going to have to accept a trade deficit. That's what U.S. is doing, because U.S. dollar is a world reserve currency. So essentially, when the Fed Reserve print dollars, they flood the world with the U.S. dollar, but in return, they have to accept a lot of the trade imports coming to the U.S. You have to accept a large trade deficit. China don't want that, but what China do want is they want to use yuan as a trade currency. And because that makes sense, because China is already the world's largest trading nation. It's a manufacturing superpower. You don't need to use the dollars to do trade with China. Why? You're not so a lot of the CIS, I think, is going to gain a lot more currency in the coming years and decades, and this will also reduce the risk of country getting be placed under financial sanction by the U.S. The thing with the U.S. weaponizing its dominance of finance is that the more you use the financial sanction as a weapon, the less effective it becomes. Because one reason U.S. dollar have enjoyed its status as a world reserve currency for so long is because it's ease of use. Because everybody uses, so it makes sense. But now, if you make it very dangerous to hold the dollar because your saving could be seized at any moment by the U.S. government, people are going to seek alternatives, and that's exactly what happened.
And this is what Jim Rogers, billionaire investor Jim Rogers, had to say about holding U.S. stocks. He says, "I sold all of my U.S. stocks recently because I've seen this party before," meaning that he sees a major and imminent economic collapse and catastrophe right over the horizon. And while he's doing that, I want to play something to show you. This is a short clip to show you how people are so fed up with U.S. intransigence and interfering in domestic policies and trying to use the dollar and trade as a weapon that they're moving outside of the dollar. So listen to this right here.
Well, our next guest here on the program is a professor at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro who touched on many of the issues that are actually on the agenda at the ongoing BRICS summit.
We are living in a world, plenty of wars, every year a new war, and I think that United States and their allies in Europe are unable to manage the world system anymore. We need to reform United Nations Security Council. That's something that is evident because this United Nations was not able to reorganize the world in terms of a peace agenda and was not able to stop Israel from which this country is doing with Palestinians. So it's evident that it doesn't work anymore. We see that local currency is every time more used for the commerce within BRICS countries. I don't think that BRICS is going to propose just a unique currency for the bloc. That was a debate in the past. Now, I have the impression that now the proposal is to use more and more local currencies. And of course, this is something that is going to put dollar in a very difficult situation. Participation of Palestine in this summit as observer is something that means that the ideas and the proposals by the end of this summit would be in that direction, to have a peace agenda and against the genocide in Gaza. And of course, the United States is going to see this as a threat. The international Occidental press is talking about that this is a bloc against Occident. I think it's not against Occident. It's in favor of a new kind of world order. A world order that can really help to have a reasonable relation between the countries and a reasonable new agreement for development.
So she is, in essence, talking about how the U.S. and the Western world leaders have shown that they are not competent enough to guide the world into a better system. And I say that because if we judge the leaders of the United States and the European Union, those because we have France, Britain, the United States, 3 of the 5 permanent members, and we see that all of the institutions were formed after World War II under U.S. and British domination. If we were to hold them to the same standard that we hold people who are CEOs, CFOs, COOs, and presidents of corporations, we would have kicked them out of office long ago. We would have fired them long ago because the way they're running the corporation or the system or their countries into the ground. Why isn't that metric applied in the Western world when they fire people who are showing themselves not useful to the company, but they allow leaders who show themselves not useful to their nations, they allow them to continue to rule?
Well, this is called failing upward, Rasheed. I mean, because nobody's holding them accountable. You know, who is holding them accountable? Instead, we have a like a musical chairs of these different oligarchs representative in our elected office. Trump, Biden, it's all the same. These are just represent different factions of the oligarchy elite. It's true. Okay, that you're but they're all backed by this by either Wall Street or Silicon Valley tech bros. It has nothing to do with people on the street. It has nothing to do with Joe Sixpack in Michigan. The game is rigged from the start, Rasheed.
Mm-hmm. So now back to the nations being fed up with the Western way of doing things, pretty much the U.S. British way of doing things, currency wise, economic wise. This is what is going on outside of the U.S. dollar and the U.S. and British so-called financial system.
We understand the New Development Bank's caution. We are saying, and we discussed this just today at the meeting of the governors of the New Development Bank, that we are ready to offer mechanisms that would minimize the risks coming from Western sanctions against Russia. Those mechanisms would not involve Western financial infrastructure or settlement in currencies of those countries that imposed sanctions on Russia, and would secure the New Development Bank from possible risks. Settlements in national currencies have proven their reliability and independence from Western lending institutions that at any moment, as it turned out, can suspend payments. We use reliable banks that have established correspondent relations with each other, and within the framework of these correspondent relations, they ensure settlements for the trade turnover our nations have. We can see that trade turnover with China has increased over the past year. We hope that these same figures of increased turnover will also be maintained this year and will continue to grow. Therefore, establishing direct correspondent relations between credit institutions of the BRICS countries is one of the conditions for ensuring turnover through settlements and monetary funds.
So, Carl, we see they were talking about at the BRICS meeting about more and more countries are using their own currencies to settle trade outside of the dollar because of the threat of sanctions. Why do you think that there's no competent leaders to realize, like Lindsey Girly Boy Graham, always threatening to use sanctions and tariffs against people? This would push anyone in another direction, because the United States should not even be in that position, because they should want people to carry out transactions, because they get a cut of each transaction when it uses the dollar.
imperial hubris. And these guys, and you said it yourself. When is last time Lindsey Graham had a real job? These guys are so disconnected from the real world. They think they probably think the money grow on trees, and for most of them they do. They just all they have to do is continue to do what their financial backer demands, and the money will continue to flow into their pockets. That's what they're real good at. That's their core competence. And but as for real world consequences of their action, I mean, I don't think they think that far. And there's also a lot of hubris. They think the U.S. And the West will continue to dominate the world forever. And this is why China upset them so much, because, as you often said, here is a non-white, non-Western nation rising without colonization, without slavery, without doing all the shit that they have been doing. That is unacceptable. They don't want people to look at China as a model of development, because this kind of invalidate their own. And this is but they're fighting a losing battle, because everything they do right now is sabotage. Everything they do trying to safeguard U.S. supremacy is actually having the opposite effect. It's sabotaging the U.S. empire in the long run, in the intermediate run, and in the short run. So. It's okay. I'm okay with that, and I am okay with that.
I want to play this clip, and I want your thoughts after this. This is a short clip, also. This is
Here
about
in
Trump.
Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, the tariff talk has become one of the highlights of the meeting because once again, the export-driven ASEAN is facing uncertainty as President Donald Trump moves to play his tariff game. Only Vietnam has managed to secure a partial reprieve with tariffs on its goods lowered to 20% from the initial proposed 46%. For the rest of the region, including key manufacturing hubs like here in Malaysia, the outcome is far less reassuring. In a letter addressed directly to His Majesty Sultan Ibrahim, King of Malaysia, Trump announced a sweeping 25% tariff on all Malaysian goods and products entering the U.S. Trump further expressed disappointment over the lack of reciprocity in the bilateral trading relationship.
Our relationship has been, unfortunately, far from reciprocal. Starting on August 1st, 2025, we will charge Malaysia a tariff of only 25% on any and all Malaysian products sent into the United States, separate from all sectoral tariffs. Goods transshipped to evade a higher tariff will be subject to that higher tariff. If for any reason you decide to raise your tariffs, then whatever the number you choose to raise them by will be added onto the 25% that we charge. You will never be disappointed with the United States of America.
During the ASEAN Foreign Minister meeting in Kuala Lumpur, Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim responded to this. Anwar noted that any unilateral tariffs will affect negatively on the economy of the country and also to the region, and he will convey Malaysia's considerations as trade country during his meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio scheduled tomorrow.
We have sent teams to negotiate and explain the position that ours is a trading nation, and therefore any unilateral tariffs will of course impact negatively on the economy of this country and this region. But we are still in the midst of negotiations. And when I meet Secretary Rubio tomorrow, I will certainly raise some of these issues for his consideration, so they can also take up to before the final decision by President Trump.
Malaysia and ASEAN is not alone in the list of countries under tariffs. Trump has sent tariff warning letters to 14 countries, starting with Japan and South Korea. Both are now facing a 25% tariff on their exports to the U.S. And despite the move, both Tokyo and Seoul say they're open to further talks, with Japan hoping for a possible trade deal. Trump confirmed similar letters were also sent to Kazakhstan and South Africa, with tariffs reaching up to 40%. In a follow-up action, he revealed another round of letters, this time to leaders of Tunisia, Bangladesh, Serbia, and another ASEAN country, Indonesia. Jakarta will receive an additional 32% tariff on top of a 10% baseline. In all the letters, Trump poured out his heart by criticizing the trade deficits the U.S. runs with these countries, as regional foreign ministers gathered amid these fresh concerns over U.S. tariff. Malaysia, the ASEAN chair, urged nations to act with purpose and boost commerce among themselves in the face of global uncertainty.
You know what this reminds me of, Carl? It reminds me of on the schoolyard when you're getting beat on the basketball court, but you have the basketball and you're crying. So you take your basketball and you go home. You don't want to play anymore because you can't compete with the people. You were always able to beat the little kids, but the kids that are your side, you can't beat. So you just get mad and take the basketball and go home.
Well, that's exactly what Trump is doing. He's being a petulant child. But this, again, all he's doing is pushing the ASEAN country to even work closer with China. Already ASEAN is China's largest trading partner, and vice versa. So the thing with US is just Trump is offering all sticks, no carrots, right? And he's not saying, okay, if you work with us, we'll sweeten the deal by bringing foreign investment, we'll invest in your infrastructure. No, none of that. It's like, if you don't do what I say, I will slap 25% tariff. Trump says he's care about trade deficit, but not really. I mean, if you care about trade deficit, then just sell to China the goods they actually want to buy. Instead they put all these sanctions on chips, on AI chips. So China can't actually buy anything from U.S. that actually they want to buy. And there's only so much soybean and corn they could buy. So, if you look at the U.S. export figures to China, the number one export is soybean. It looks like what a third world country export to a first world country. All raw commodities, right? Mm-hmm. And this is why this makes the trade deficit much, much worse. And this is because China is not allowed to buy anything they actually want to buy from the U.S. And this is actually bad for the U.S. industry as a whole. This is why NVIDIA head Jensen Huang keep on shuttling back and forth between Washington and Beijing. He's trying to save his company, and now there's a. But the thing is, what does he think? Yeah. Anyway, Trump's policy is really contradictory and stupid because on one hand, he wants to defend the U.S. dollar status as the world reserve currency, right? And he gets really upset when people like President Lula is proposing alternative. But in order for U.S. to be a world reserve currency, it means other central banks will keep a large amount of dollars in reserve. U.S. will export dollars. What happens when you export dollars? You're gonna get goods back. Mm-hmm. That's you're gonna end up with trade deficit. That's what happens. You can't have your cake and eat it too. He wants to maintain both the dollar hegemony and he wants to reduce the trade deficit. It's just not gonna happen. That's just it just. But I never. Nobody can accuse Trump of being a very smart person. So he will continue his failed trade policies, and it's gonna just alienate everybody. And on one hand, U.S. want to to tell all these Asian nations, oh, you gotta align with, you're gonna choose us over China. You're gonna. On the other hand, they're slapping them with tariffs left and right. I mean, this is why Southeast Asia already starting to make their choice. They're choosing China because China don't. When China offers them a trade deal, it comes with no strings attached. China is not slapping them with tariff. In fact, right now China just rolled out a zero tariff policy for most African countries.
Yeah,
this is at the same time when Trump is slapping tariff against everybody. So the contrast couldn't be more clear.
And also, China has alleviated a lot of the debt that was owed to China from a lot of the African countries. So let's not forget that a lot of African nations and China did not take the collateral from a lot of, because people put up ports and stuff, and China did not take the collateral from them. I want to put that out there. So Flying Crocodile 46 says, the only way to stop BRICS from taking over is to tip the table over. I think this is what is going on. I think Trump is pissed with ASEAN and BRICS because they won't bow. They're starting to face the reality that China is the choice that they should make when it comes to their economic prosperity. And I think that he's lashing out because it's insane to then levy sanctions against Japan, your largest debt holder outside of the Fed, and South Korea, which is one of the largest debt holders of the United States too. And then to say that I'm going to wage war against ASEAN and I'm going to wage war against the BRICS. This is absolutely insane, Carl. I mean, from any metrics that you judge this from, you would have to say that the people in DC are not playing with a full deck, or they don't understand global finance and economics.
They don't have all of their brains in place. I think that's a problem.
Now I want to play this clip for you, and on the back end, I want you to give me your take on this, because this is what Africa and Asia and the world is talking about. Trump's tariffs and how it's forcing other people to do other things in other nations. So on the back end of this, I want your take on this.
Moving on now, despite what may seem crystal clear to many, the U.S. dollar's nosedive is rooted in domestic policies. Trump is quick to point fingers at BRICS. He has even threatened to slap a 10% tax on all imports from BRICS nations, claiming that they are ganging up against the U.S. South Africa's president called out Trump, insisting that the bloc's cooperation is not meant to confront anyone in particular.
There is nothing negative in the declaration, and there is everything about advancing the interests of various countries in the world, if not all, and the interests of people in the world, so that we leave no one behind. So it is really disappointing that when there is such a very positive collective manifestation such as BRICS, there should be others who see it in negative light and want to punish those who participate in this. It cannot be and should not be. It cannot be that might should now be right, where in the end those who are more powerful are the ones who seek to have vengeance against those who are seeking to do good in the world.
Well, let's get some more insight from Buka Omole, General Secretary of the Communist Party, Marxist Kenya. Buka, I'm glad to have you join me now. So what impact do you think Trump's additional tariffs might have on the BRICS nations?
First, it's important to acknowledge that the imposition of tariffs is actually geared towards a protectionist policy to try and rescue the strategic decline of the United States imperialism. But it's also important to acknowledge that even with the imposition of tariffs, it can only accelerate the very process that Trump envisions to correct. Talking about the BRICS nation, that is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, it basically will only accelerate how the trade, the shifting of the trade to move away from the dollar dominations. And if the tariffs were actually aimed to isolate, particularly China, Russia, and the countries of the BRICS, then it will actually reinforce the currency swipe strategy that it's currently ongoing, and can only deepen the trade in the national currencies of the BRICS countries, and actually to accelerate an alternative financial system and challenge to the dollar supremacy. So, in our opinion, the Trump's actions are not merely miscalculations, but they are actually failing gestures of a wounded empire that cannot rule in the old way. So we think that the more they tighten their grip, then the more actually the nations will slip through their fingers, and the United States will actually accelerate its strategic decline.
All right. Now, Kenya is also looking to join the group. What benefits do you think BRICS membership can bring to the country?
Kenya at the moment is suffering extremely in the imposed neoliberal policies by the Bretton Woods institutions, particularly the IMF and World Bank. There is an enforced currency devaluation, mainly from the pressure of the United States. So Kenya is already suffering, and even the social explosion that you currently see in the streets in Nairobi is the crisis of the United States imperialism interventionist policy in the Kenyan affairs. So Kenya is just one of the countries in the global south, particularly in Africa, that are seeking an alternative to the United States' consistent interference on their internal affairs. So Kenya sees a lot of possibilities in joining BRICS to particularly challenge the United States' dominance in its national affairs. This is important that if the Kenyan people and the Kenyan nation gets admitted into the BRICS, then definitely the over-reliance of dollar as the primary currency for trade and the interference of the Kenyan economy through fiscal policies that are driven by World Bank and IMF will actually reduce, particularly the United States, arrogant overload that continues in the global south. We see BRICS as, a sure possibility.
All right, talking about challenging the United States, South Africa's Cyril Ramaphosa says BRICS is only interested in promoting positive cooperation and is not looking to confront anyone in particular. How do you think that message will be perceived in Washington?
We appreciate President Ramaphosa's remarks as mainly a diplomatic posture, in the essence that any direct confrontation with the United States empire can only make it aggressive against the South African people and the people of the global south. So we interpret this as a global, a diplomatic posture. But in material sense, the BRICS already are, confronting the United States hegemony. They are a biggest threat to the trade domination ties that exist, unequal trade domination ties that exist between the imperial core in Washington and the rest of the, the South African economy and African countries. So even though President Ramaphosa might appear diplomatic, but indeed BRICS is the permanent, accelerating the permanent decline of the United States empire. But in actual sense, we appreciate his diplomatic posture as the rest of the world reconsolidates itself for the final blow to the U.S. imperialism.
All right, we have to leave you here now. Buka Mole, General Secretary of the Communist Party, Marxist Kenya, thank you for your insight.
So Carl, he says the more they, talking about the U.S. and the West, tighten their grip, the more the nations will slip through their hand. And he said, and I thought that was an apt saying right there. And he says that, well, the world is tired of the U.S. arrogant overload, and we know that he continued to harp on BRICS and how BRICS is a driver for independence and liberation. This is why China has become Russia, specifically Russia, China, South Africa, Brazil, and India have become prime targets for U.S. destabilization and sanctions because they see them as the antithesis to everything that the Western world stood on.
Yeah. First of all, devaluing the dollars. This is intended. This is a Trump policy. He wants to devalue the dollar so the U.S. export can be more competitive, right? But what happens when you devalue a dollar? That leave all the people who have the U.S. dollar as reserve holding the bag. That the policy is to beggar your neighbor, right? And it's to continue to print money so U.S. can print to. This is how U.S. plan to solve its debt crisis. By the way, just continue to print so the debt the foreigners hold of the U.S. Treasury becomes increasingly worthless, and then to inflate their obligation away. But then people are not stupid, man. People can see what you're doing. Why would you think they would just passively accept that? It's like, okay, yeah, all the money I loaned you before, now just a pile of paper. We're just gonna sit here and accept that. And of course, they're gonna try to shift the value of their savings out of the dollars into other currencies or other commodities, and so that's why more Trump is doing. I think Trump actually understands some of the problem that face United States, but all his solutions just making the problem much worse, and there's no turning back.
Mm-hmm. And in closing, before we go off, I want your take on this. This is an article that was published on Fortune magazine, and the title of the article, if I can get it up, it was talking about the U.S. outlook. And this is what it says. The U.S. debt outlook is so dire, it now resembles the student loan crisis, former White House economic advisor says. It says, Jared Bernstein, who previously served as the chair of President Joe Biden's Council on Economic Advisors, has had a change of heart when it comes to U.S. debt. After being a longtime dove, he has become a hawk because our nation's budget math just got a lot more dangerous. He cited President Trump's tariffs and tax cuts. The U.S. is inviting a debt shock if it continues on its current trajectory, which is starting to look like unsustainable student loans, according to Jared Bernstein, who previously served on that economic council. What do you say about that? Because he's saying it's starting to look like it. It's been looking like that for a long time. And now that they can no longer kick the can down the road, I think that all of the rats are jumping off the ship because they see the life preservers out there and they're trying to jump on it and tell the other ones, hey, so long, buddy, we're out of here.
That's exactly what's happening. Like people are not dumb. People can see what Trump is doing and what the U.S. administration is trying to do, and they're formulating their own strategy, their counter strategy. This is why. Again, fundamentally, I think the problem is all these U.S. Trump's solutions, quote unquote, he still think there's like a magic pill. This is like very American short-term mentality. They think that the tariff will be a magic pill, just like they're just like the way they're marketing diet pills. Like, take this pill, you'll have washboard stomach in no time, right? That's not how biology works. You're gonna have to put in hard work. You're gonna have to eat properly. You're gonna work out properly, and then over long-term period of time, then you'll have a healthy body. It's like that diet pill that tariff can't work. But if it's paired with the right industrial policy, right? But that's the part U.S. government cannot do. China's government is set up so you could do industrial policy, you could do long-term planning, but U.S. government is not set up for doing that kind of thing. It's set up to funnel money to the 1%, right? It's to make the rich richer. It's not set up to do long-term planning, to do infrastructure, to investment into education, to do industrial policy, because most of the politicians they might be out of the office in 4 years. Trump will be out here in 4 years. He doesn't care. He doesn't care what happens after he leaves office. You cannot have long-term planning, any kind of long-term planning. Like any kind of treaties that one U.S. president signs, the next president can just throw it out the window. You cannot have long-term planning, and it's by design. Now, U.S. This is why Trump's tariff is ultimately doomed to fail, because and all his like his policy are doomed to fail, because they cannot work. It just won't work. And a lot of these, not to mention a lot of these policies are self-contradictory. So yeah, man, we're still gonna be here, laughing through the imperial decline.
Carl, I think Arcane Eclectic has the most apt saying tonight. It said, when the king is a clown, the court is a circus. I think that is beautiful there. I think that's one of the notes that we should end on tonight, Carl.
I agree. It's a clown show, but it's entertaining. It's entertaining to watch.
Again, thank you, my brother. We'll do this again real soon. Be safe, be blessed, and thank you for coming on, man.
Thank you, Rasheed. Always.